So hello everyone. In the last class we ended by talking about mining, and I had said that various users broadcast their transactions which they want to get into the blockchain. These are put by all miners in their transaction pools, and each miner is free to choose whichever subset of transactions in the transaction pool to put in his block. And once he does that, what he continues to do is uh, he creates this Merkle tree and puts the Merkle root in the block header, right? And then what he does is he changes this nonce repeatedly and tries to win the game. Yeah, and of course, if somebody else wins the game before him, he checks the block which is received, and if everything is fine, he starts creating yet another block, and he discards all the transactions which were there in that block from his transaction pool, because they are already in the blockchain. So there are few interesting things which I hadn't mentioned last time. So I had said that of course the previous hash is 256 bits, and let me see how to make this. Okay, anyway, 256 bits, and I had mistakenly said that this is also 256 bits. So it turns out that this is not true. So how many bytes is this? This is 64 bytes. Wait 1 second. Yeah, this is no, I beg your pardon. This is 32 bytes, right? Okay, so anyway, so the thing is, Satoshi wanted a very small block header because he was thinking of these light clients and the amount of information to store and so on. And the total block header is only 80 bytes. So what he said is that the nonce actually is of size 32 bits. So that seems very small because you can only try 32, I mean 2 to the power of 32 values, right? And what do you do after that if you don't win the game? So that's a good point. So what they would do is they would create this sort of a tree and try out 2 to the power of 32 different values for the nonce. But then what they do is, if you remember, this first transaction is the Coinbase. And the Coinbase has some fields where arbitrary data can be put in. Okay, so besides the fee that the miner takes for himself, there are other fields which can be manipulated arbitrarily by the miner. Okay, in fact, in the first block in Bitcoin, Satoshi had put a famous statement in the Coinbase in one of these fields, saying that there was this 2008 crisis, banking crisis, and he had put in an interesting comment about that. That we can't, pretty much he was insinuating that we can't trust the banks. So we need some sort of an alternative like what he was creating, like Bitcoin. Okay, so he had used this Coinbase field for that. But anyway, so suppose you have this field in the Coinbase. What the miner would do is he would change some bits in this, reconstruct the entire Merkle tree, change the Merkle root, and then start the game again, change the nonces. Okay, so of course he doesn't have to reconstruct the entire tree, but he would have to change at least a part of it, at least these nodes on let's say one of the branches going up to the root. right? The rest of them would stay the same because the transactions are not being modified. So the miner doesn't really waste time in doing this, because while doing the first game and with the first Merkle root, while he was trying out these 2 to the power of 32 values, he could get ready the new Merkle root, right? And in parallel, he could just update this Coinbase to something else, create the new Merkle root, so that when that first round of 2 to the power of 32 options for the nonce was tried, he could immediately replace the Merkle root and start over again. Okay, so Satoshi was trying to optimize many things from the beginning, and he wanted to create a short header. Okay, so how to set the target? So we said that there is a block header, and we want the hash of this block header to be less than the target threshold. So why do we want to why can't it be set arbitrarily? So just think about it. So suppose this is your range 0 to 2 to the power of 256 minus 1, okay. And every time somebody tries a nonce, we would get some value here, and it's pretty much going to look like a random number just because the output of the hash function is unpredictable. And what we say is that the result should be less than the target, and this target is given by the bits field, which is given in the block header. So what is going to decide what this target is going to be? What should we set it to be? Okay, so Satoshi had this something to think about when he was inventing Bitcoin. And let's think what would happen if you had a very small target. Let's write that down. Suppose in the extreme case I said that the target let's just say less than or equal to, and let's say that the target is 0. So I say that the block header has to have hash value equal to 0. Okay, so it turns out, so how long is it going to take? So you would have a really large number of trials to make, and of the order of 2 to the power of 256 trials, which is a massive number, right? It would take forever, even if we had all the computing power in the world just to generate a block. So that doesn't make sense. So we want to have a larger threshold than 0. But the question is how large, and what happens if it's too large? Okay, so let's say that it was suppose t is 2 to the power of 256 divided by 2. Okay, so that the threshold was, let's say, halfway in the range. So then on average, every 2 trials, somebody would generate a block. Okay, and so what happens then? So let's think about this. So suppose this is the blockchain, and we are currently at this point in the blockchain. So then what would happen is that everybody is trying to generate a new block on this one, and simultaneously you would have lots of people generating blocks at the same time. So let's say there is a particular miner, let's say miner X has generated this, miner Y has generated this, Z has generated, all of them simultaneously generate blocks, right? Because they are each trying out millions of trials per second, and they need only 2 to create a block. Okay, so this we are going to see something very peculiar like this. and instead of having a chain we would see some sort of a tree structure. So why is it that let's say suppose X creates a block first, it so happens in real time, let's say X created it first, why is it that Y doesn't receive his block immediately? And the answer is that there are network delays. And because of these network delays, it takes some time for a block to propagate. It may be of the order of 10 seconds or so, okay, roughly of that order. 10 seconds or few tens of seconds, maybe in the worst case a minute or so, right, for the block to propagate. So the block header of course is small, 80 bytes, but the entire Bitcoin block is about 1 megabyte. Okay, and for 1 megabyte to travel through the network takes a little bit of time. So let's actually discuss that. So the network propagation. So let's say that X has created a block which is mined on the latest block in the chain, and he transmits it through the internet, something like he sends it to his peer, just like you have in your first assignment, and the block gets shipped over here. So it takes some time for the block to go across. So let's say that this particular path is modeled as a single pipe. Okay, it's an approximation. We are not modeling all the routers and so on the way, but let's say that it has C bits per second bit rate, and let's say that the block size is let's say it is B. So how much time is it going to take for the block to go from here to here? Okay, so it takes, first of all, the speed of light delay. Let's call this D is the speed of light delay. Okay, and so time from X to Y for the block to go is first of all D, plus it takes some time for Y to receive this entire block. Okay, the first bit when it leaves here takes D seconds to reach here, but it takes some time. It's like a train traveling and you need to wait for the last coach to arrive, right? So the last bit of that 1 MB or B bits of the block has to come in. So roughly it is something like this, B divided by C, and it takes that much time to reach Y. Okay. Now Y, let's say, has a peer Z, and Y wants to forward this information to Z. So what he does is, if he's a good miner, he doesn't immediately send the block. He first of all checks whether the block is correct or not, and if there is any invalid transaction or something like that, he throws away the block. He doesn't bother Z at all. Right? So, and that's a good practice to have, so that junk blocks don't float around in the network. As soon as they are broadcast, they are thrown away by the peers, the honest peers. So it takes Y some time. Okay, so Y processes, let's say Y verifies the block, and let's say that it takes a certain amount of time, let's say V amount of time for verification. And suppose the block is valid, it forwards the block to Z, which will take another amount of time, something like this. Of course, here it is a delay between X and Y. There would be a different delay between Y and Z, and a different link rate. So here it's C bits per second is the data rate, here it may be something else. Okay. So roughly for the total end-to-end propagation of the block, let's say on a path in the peer-to-peer network, is the sum of such delays. So di plus b divided by ci plus bi, where I is over all links in the path. So this is sort of a crude network model for what happens. And as you can see, in a global network, even just the propagation delays will go into the order of hundreds of milliseconds. Okay, and depending on these data rates, depending on what they are, because nowadays the data rates are pretty high, this could be of the order of tens of milliseconds per link, even between two peers. And verification time, of course, depends on the hardware and depends on how many transactions are there and so on. Okay? So all of this summed up together might be of the order of tens of seconds if you look at the worst case delay in the path. So, okay, it takes some time for blocks to propagate. So if Y is himself mining and it takes him, let's say, a microsecond to generate a block if the threshold is very large, then before he receives X block, he's going to generate his own block and he's going to send it out, right? And similarly, Z is going to do the same. So instead of having a chain, we have a tree being formed like this, which is chaos because nobody knows which is the real blockchain here. Right? A different set of transactions have been included maybe in different blocks. There could be double spends. For example, somebody is paying, let's say A is paying his money to B here and the same money he's paying to C or to D over here, right? I mean, so it's chaos, total chaos. Somebody who thinks that this is the valid blockchain accepts this transaction, whereas somebody who thinks that this is the valid blockchain is going to take this as the valid transaction. So we definitely want to avoid forks. So fork is a situation where you have multiple blocks pointing to the same parent block. We want to reduce that as much as possible. So now coming back to the question, how do we decide what the threshold is going to be, the target threshold? We don't want it to be too small and we don't want it to be too large. So what is an optimal number to choose? Okay, so Satoshi was thinking about this, and of course Satoshi didn't just do some sort of theoretical analysis. He actually built Bitcoin. He actually implemented it and tested it out in his own networks, maybe in his own simulation or emulation testbed. So how to set the threshold? So let's look at a timeline. So this is time, and let us say that this is what miner X is seeing and what Y is seeing. So let's say that they are both mining on the same block. Let's say that this is the chain. X is trying to create his block, Y is trying to create his block. They are trying to win the puzzle, solve the puzzle first. And so there is mining going on. And X creates the block here. So it solved the puzzle. Now it sends out the block and it takes some time for this block to propagate, of the order of seconds to Y. Okay, and it might take order of seconds from Y to somebody else Z, right? So X and Z, as we are assuming, are not directly connected. Okay. So in this time, Y is still mining on the previous block. So let's say that this is BK and YK is still mining on that block. Even though it has been created by X, because the block is taking some time to reach Y, and even when it reaches Y has to verify, right? So the Y is mining, so there's some probability that Y generates a block himself over here. So let's say if Y solves the puzzle here, then we have a fork. So X has generated a block and Y might also generate a block. So given that we have a certain propagation time across the network, it's possible, I mean there's always some non-zero probability that somebody else generates a block pointing to the same parent. And we want to reduce those occurrences because it creates problems. Nobody knows which is the final blockchain. So given that this is, let's say, of the order of tens of seconds, the entire network propagation, we want to choose the threshold so that the chances of somebody generating a block here is very small, okay, during this propagation time. So Satoshi said, since the propagation time is of the order of tens of seconds, let's choose the threshold so that it takes roughly 10 minutes to generate a block on average. So choose the target such that one block is created every 10 minutes. So that's 600 seconds. So this is what he decided. Okay, and so what happens is that in practice is that you have the Bitcoin blockchain and it takes very long, I mean like 10 minutes for somebody to generate another block. So this is how I'm looking at time here. And it's very unlikely that while this block is propagating, somebody else solves the puzzle. Okay, so everybody receives this block, let's say most of them. So they start mining on this block and they stop mining on the previous block. So pretty much you have something which looks like a chain. Okay. Now the question is, how do you ensure that it's 10 minutes? That is a very tricky thing, because if you think about it, initially there was only Satoshi and his laptop or desktop or whatever, he was the only one mining. And the interesting story is that nobody thought Bitcoin would become anything, right, except Satoshi. So he was the only one mining for the several months in the beginning, right, and he was getting 50 Bitcoins per block as mining fee. So the first 1 million Bitcoins were mined just by Satoshi. That's what people believe. Because I mean, nobody else thought it would be worth anything. Even maybe Satoshi wasn't sure if it would be worth anything. So he was the only one mining at that time. And 1 million Bitcoin belongs to him, which is today worth something like 12 billion, right, USD. It might go up to 100 billion or whatever, right? Satoshi might be the wealthiest man in the world someday, right, overtaking even Jeff Bezos. But interestingly, Satoshi doesn't ever use his 1 million Bitcoin. And you might want to think why. You can suggest an answer maybe in the live session, right? Why would he not want to spend his Bitcoin? I mean, why not just live a lavish lifestyle, right, with so much of money? But of course, Satoshi might have, might be anyway a wealthy guy, right? Because if he's such a smart computer scientist and experienced person, maybe he made a lot of money in the 90s itself, you never know, right? Or he's maybe very accomplished. And of course, if he had so much time on his hands to think about Bitcoin, probably he was somebody who didn't need to do a job, right? So probably he was anyway a wealthy guy, so he may not want to spend it. But still, why doesn't he touch these 1 million Bitcoin which was created in the initial few blocks? Okay, so that's something you might want to think about. Anyway, so Satoshi was the only one mining in these few blocks, and he chose a threshold. I mean, of course, he had thought of how to adjust the target and so on, but let's say that it took 10 minutes on average to generate a block. So now, but more and more people started joining. As time progressed, more and more, and people started using hardware rather than trying to use their laptops or whatever. They're doing the mining in software. They actually built ASICs to do the mining faster in hardware. So if we use the threshold that Satoshi used over here, you would have, and you use today's mining power, you would have maybe millions of blocks generated per second, which is no good. So using Satoshi's original threshold, which he had over here, let's say some T0, if we use that same threshold over here, we'd be in trouble. We would have too many forks. So clearly this threshold has to adjust based on the mining power. So how are we going to do that? It's a very, very tricky thing. How would you do it? You might want to think about it. So first of all, let's think about, so mining power doesn't change instantaneously that much, right? So people have invested a lot of money in mining, and provided there are lots of miners, there's no single large player. People joining and leaving the peer-to-peer network may not be that abrupt. So maybe we don't have to adjust the threshold so often, right? Maybe we shouldn't adjust it in every block. That would be like an overkill. But maybe we should do it once in a while. So Satoshi had this idea. So he said that let's update the threshold every 2 weeks. So that seems a reasonable time frame. Okay, it's not too short, it's not too large. So what does 2 weeks mean? I mean, it's 2 weeks makes sense to us as human beings, but to machines, what is 2 weeks? Because somebody might have a fast clock, somebody may have a slow clock. So 2 weeks is not the same for them, right? Especially in a distributed system like this. And when do they start counting that 2 week period? When do they end? So that's a very tricky thing. So Satoshi defined it in terms of blocks, not in terms of time. So in terms of number of blocks. So suppose it takes 10 minutes per block. So that translates to roughly 2016 blocks in 2 weeks. Right? So if actually you had a block generated every 10 minutes, it would take 2016, you would generate 2016 blocks in about 2 weeks. So he said, let's update the threshold every 2016 blocks. So you have these blocks generated, let's say this is block 0 and block 2015. So Satoshi, of course, was the only one mining in the beginning. So for the 2016th block, he had to update his threshold. So what he said is, let's look at how much actual time it took to generate the first this many blocks. Okay, so actually it turns out there was a slight bug in his implementation, so he actually looked at 2015 inter-arrival times between 0 and 2015. Okay. So you look at this time, let's say this is some t, time taken to generate this many blocks, and you compare that to 2 weeks, and so 2 weeks is around, in seconds, is this much. Okay, so this much time, and if it is exactly equal to this, you don't have to worry, you don't have to change the target. Okay, but if it is much smaller than this, that means the hashing power has increased. And then what do we do? Do we increase or do we decrease the target? Let's think about it. So let's say that there was a particular target here, and hashing power increased, so that means we were hitting the target more often, because of which this is much smaller than this number in the denominator over here. So what we need to do in this case is to reduce the target. So what we do is we update the target this way. You say that target, new target, is equal to the old target multiplied by this quantity. Okay. And he should have chosen this time to be the time for 2016 blocks, but it's actually 2015. Okay, so target is updated every multiple of 2016 blocks. So you update the target for block number 2016 times n for every n, every positive integer n, and you do it in this way. You look at let's say the time, and so we'll think how to do this exactly. It's a little bit tricky because nobody has the same clock, right? They are not synchronized clocks. So if I'm a miner and I want to know what to put in here, I shouldn't look at my own local clock, because that's a problem. So because I don't really know when these blocks were created, because I wasn't there when they were created, and this is where the timestamp comes in. So what I want to look at is timestamp in block number 2016 n minus 1, and I subtract the timestamp in block 2016 n minus 1, right? And this I am going to divide by this much multiplied by the target. So the new target is going to be updated every so often. Roughly it happens every 2 weeks, and you update it this way. Okay, so it's a self-adapting scenario. If the hashing power goes up, then of course the target automatically reduces, because people start creating blocks in less than 10 minutes. But if the hashing power decreases, which can happen, for example, like maybe the Bitcoin value drops so much so that certain miners don't make a profit even when they mine blocks. They are using more electricity power than they are getting Bitcoin mining fees. Okay, so it happens over time that when Bitcoin price decreases, some miners just give up. They say we are going offline. And maybe when the price increases to a certain level, maybe they start mining again. Right? So the target keeps adjusting a little bit. Okay, and maybe you'd have blocks generated less than 10 minutes sometimes on average, then it may increase and so on. Okay, so this target is always adjusted time and again. So in a distributed system like this, it gets a little bit tricky, So what timestamp do you put in the block? So ideally, a miner must use something like NTP, right, or to get some sort of a global synchronous clock running on his local machine. Okay, so this sort of NTP is a protocol which helps you synchronize with some server, right? IIT will have a few servers which will themselves sort of sync with some atomic clock somewhere, right? So ideally a miner must use NTP and must put his local timestamp while creating the block. So he has a previous hash. This is 256 bits, and the nonce, which we said is only 32 bits, and so on, right? And plus he has a timestamp here. So he has to put his timestamp in the format given by Bitcoin, and he should ideally put his most recent local timestamp in the block while actually performing the mining. Okay. So he should do that, but what if somebody doesn't use NTP? Maybe somebody's NTP is not working. So then what happens? So it might happen that somebody generates a block and the subsequent block has a timestamp which may be less than the timestamp of the previous block. Something like that might happen. Or what if somebody just puts a random number in this timestamp, just to create chaos, so that when somebody is updating the threshold, he uses a timestamp which is some crazy value of belonging to 1980 or something like that, right? And so the target threshold might go negative, or something weird like that might happen. Okay, so we need some sorts of checks. So the rules in Bitcoin are the following. So what you do is, so suppose I receive a block. Suppose a miner gets a particular block BK which has a timestamp equal to some TK, let's say. Okay. Now this block is accepted only if the timestamp is within a particular range. Okay, if and only if. First of all, this timestamp is greater than the median of the timestamp of its parent blocks. So this is the parent of BK block in the chain, and these are the timestamps of the parent of the parent, and so on. So you look at the timestamps in the previous 11 blocks. Okay, and only if this is true you are going to accept the block. And in addition, you want to make sure that the timestamp is also not too large. Somebody might put a timestamp corresponding to 2030 which satisfies this, right? It's higher than the median of the previous block, but we don't want to accept those blocks. If the timestamp is too large, we want to reduce it. So if it is greater than 2 hours of my current clock really, but what is called network adjusted time. Okay, so the miner shouldn't just look at his own clock, he should also look at his peers, because it's possible that due to some bug Maybe his NTP is not working and his own time is not so accurate. So how do you calculate this network adjusted time? So what you do is, this is calculated as my time. So this is my local time plus I look at how different my time is from my peers, the peers I am connected to. So I look at the median of offsets, that means the difference between let's say other people's clocks and my clocks. Okay, and I look at the median of those and add it to this. Offset of time with my peers. Okay, so if my clock is terribly off the real global time, then what this is going to do is, it's going to sort of get me closer to the correct time, because most of my neighbors will have the correct time, and so this offset is going to sort of fix my local time. Right? So this is going to be roughly the correct time, assuming that most of my neighbors are, have the correct time. And I add 2 hours to that, and I don't allow a timestamp larger than that. Okay, so this is what the Bitcoin rules specify. Okay, so this is going to ensure that we don't have too many forks. Right? Forks are very rare because the propagation time is 10 minutes. Sorry, the propagation time is of the order of tens of seconds, but the block interval time is roughly 10 minutes. Okay, so automatically the target is adjusted to the hashing power in order to ensure that blocks are generated every 10 minutes. So what happens if a fork occurs? I mean, because there is some small chance that when one block is propagating the network in these tens of seconds, somebody might win the game. So X might create a block on this parent, and Y might also create a block here. So now, which is the real blockchain? This is a very tricky situation. Okay, and Satoshi had to think of a solution. Okay, so the more we think about Bitcoin, the more tricky it becomes. So what looked like a very simple solution becomes challenging, and lots of problems, lots of nitty-gritty which have to be worked out. Which is why Satoshi has done an excellent job. Somebody thinks either it's a genius or it's a team from the NSA, the National Security Agency. And of course, NSA probably has the best cryptographers and computer scientists, right? So maybe that may be true. But anyway, but suppose you have a fork like this, what happens? What are you going to do? Okay, and so Satoshi's initial rule, Satoshi's first rule said that look at the longest chain. So of course here both the chains are of same length. So what does that mean? So let's say that you had X, Y, Z, E, F, G, lots of miners. So let's say X created this and Y created this. So, okay, so what happens is, first of all, that X has seen only this block. So this was his longest chain, so he's mining on this. So if there is a unique longest chain, you start mining on that. And if you have multiple longest chains, then you mine on the first one which you saw. So let's say that X generated the block and X sent it to X, who sent it to Z, and maybe the block propagated this way, and of course finally everybody received both the blocks. But at this point in time they see a fork, two chains of equal length. So the people mining on this are X, Z and E because they saw this fork first, and the people mining on this are Y, F and G because they saw this block first. Okay, and the game is played and you would expect one of them to win first. So let's say that this wins. So that means that they generate a block here. Somebody, let's say that Z generates a block pointing to this particular chain. And it's broadcast, and now of course let's say that people mining on this particular branch do not generate a block and they receive this block first. So now everybody has a unique longest chain, so this rule kicks in, and so everybody mines here on this chain. Okay? So this particular block has been orphaned. So poor Y, it took a lot of effort to create that block, it won the game, but unfortunately X's block has won now, and people have discarded Y's block. Okay. So this is how Bitcoin breaks such forks. Okay, and it's very unlikely that you would have such forks prolonging, if you have two blocks like this, because the chances that you would have somebody generating a block here and somebody generating a block here is again going to be small. It's the same probability as somebody generating a fork in the first place, right? So maybe very small, 1 in 1,000 blocks or something like that. Okay. So usually forks will be resolved pretty fast, but somebody is unfortunate, somebody who generated a valid block, his block is going to be orphaned. So what happens to the transactions in this block? That's what you might wonder. What happens to the transactions over here? So they are actually not they are completely discarded. So this block is discarded. So it may happen that X's block also includes some transactions in Y's block. That may happen because they may have had the same transaction pool here. So some of the transactions may get in over here, but maybe some transactions don't get into this immediate block, but they might get into the chain somewhere later, maybe in the subsequent block. Okay, so let's say that X had transactions, I only put in the numbers here, let's say it had transactions 1, 2, 3, 4, and Y's block had transactions 4, 5, 2, 8, right, something like that. These are just the number I'm putting in. So this block gets discarded, it's no longer there in the chain, in the winning chain, but 4 is there, right? So 4 has got in. So 4 of course is not going to be repeated, that's going to be ensured by the Bitcoin rules, because of course you can't have the same transaction because it's pointing to the same UTXO, right? And we said that UTXOs can only be used once, so obviously you can't use 4 again. But maybe a subsequent block might have 2 and 8 transactions, 2 and 8, and maybe another block later on will have transaction 5. So eventually the transactions will get in, but they didn't get in over here. Some of these transactions didn't really get in over here. Okay. So it's a tricky situation that the blocks at the end of the chain may actually get killed, they may get orphaned. So the transactions are not really finalized even if they get into a block. So it's a very tricky situation which we'll have to discuss. But before we get into discussing that, it turns out that this rule is a little bit of a dangerous one, which Satoshi realized in the earlier days, and so he changed the rule a little bit. So this longest chain looks at number of blocks. And that might work if everybody is honest. So instead what we should look at is something called the chain weight. Okay. So suppose this is the Bitcoin blockchain and all the honest miners are generating this. Honest miner, I mean somebody who's following all the rules, and they've generated, let's say, tens of thousands of blocks. So let's say that there is a malicious person who wants to create a longer chain from some block in the past. So this is what he wants to do. And let's say that we are following the longest chain rule. So if he is able to generate a longest chain, okay, so all this chain which he generated in is totally private. He is not broadcasting these blocks. The honest people are sending out their blocks as soon as they are generated. He is keeping this chain private. He is a malicious miner, and these sorts of people exist. You have to expect them to exist in a Bitcoin-like situation, right? Because you have no idea who's actually mining. Okay? So, so he's creating this chain, and he knows that if he creates a longer chain and then he broadcasts this chain, then this entire chain gets killed. And that's going to be a disaster for the Bitcoin blockchain, because if such a thing can happen, all the transactions which were included here are now invalid. Okay, and only the transactions which were included in this block are valid. So this is a serious problem. Not only do we have to worry about the last chain getting orphaned, we have to worry last block getting orphaned, we have to worry about a set of blocks which could be killed by some malicious miner. So now this malicious miner, of course, one advantage that we assume that the honest people have is that most of the hashing power is with them. Okay, like people have invested millions of dollars, they are doing hashing here, and the malicious person has, let's say, has less hashing power than the honest people. If he has more hashing power than the honest one, we've had it. It's something called a 51% attack. But anyway, so let's assume that's not the case. So this person, let's say, only has a laptop or desktop or a cluster of machines or whatever, not too much. But what he can do is he can choose particular targets and timestamps so that he generates these faster. So he doesn't put real timestamps because after all he's a malicious person. So he puts some fake timestamps. He goes back far in the past, let's say to almost till the Genesis block, and he puts timestamps corresponding to that year, and he chooses thresholds, target thresholds in them, so that in real time he's able to very quickly find solutions to generate these. Let's say every second he generates a block. Yeah? But he puts a timestamp pretending that it's taken him 10 minutes to generate a block. So he does this all the way, he generates a block every 1 second, and everybody else is taking 10 seconds to generate a block, 10 minutes to generate a block. So very quickly he's able to generate a chain which is longer than this one, than the honest chain, and then he broadcasts it. And he kills the entire Bitcoin blockchain in the process, because the longest chain rule says that everybody must mine on the longest chain that they are aware of. So this is a problem. So longest chain in terms of number of blocks is not going to work because it's vulnerable to this attack. So Satoshi said that we shouldn't look at this, right? We shouldn't look at longest chain. So instead what we should look at is the chain weight. So what is that? So for each block, you look at the expected weight, expected work in terms of hashing power of a block is equal to 2 to the power of 256 divided by the target plus 1. Okay, so this is how it is defined. So the target could theoretically even be 0, right? So you have target plus 1. So roughly it takes on average this many number of hashes to create the block. Of course it's only expected, it's not the real number of hashes taken to generate the block, because somebody may have been lucky, maybe in the first try itself he chose a non-switch solved the puzzle. But on average it takes this many hashes to generate a particular block. So this is the expected work of a block, and the expected work of a chain is the sum of the expected work of blocks let's say block BI, and you look over all blocks in the chain. Now the game has changed a lot, because the targets used for these blocks are much smaller. Everybody is hashing on them, all the honest miners. So expected work for each of these blocks is really large. And for this sort of a chain, the targets are going to be quite large, because he has to generate them fast. He would have had to choose a target which is large. And because of that, he is not going to win the game. The expected work of his chain is going to be much small. So the longest chain rule was changed a little bit, where you look at longest chain in terms of expected work of a chain rather than number of blocks in the chain. So this took care of certain attacks. Okay, so a very tricky situation, and we'll have to see what sort of other attacks are possible, because a malicious person might try to do something else, right? This is just one attack, and in a real world situation, essentially any sort of attack is possible. But the good thing about proof of work is that it can't be faked. So the proof of work game can't be faked, and in fact, if somebody is able to find a hash of a block which is less than the target, on average he would actually have to spend an average amount of work which is equal to this number. Okay, so even a malicious attacker has to put in a lot of effort to do proof of work, and that is what is going to constrain him in the real world. Okay, so this is really the genius of Satoshi's work, proof of work, a very simple solution which constrains malicious people, and at the same time it forces people to invest money while actually doing proof of work. Okay, so we look at other issues in a subsequent lecture.